Um, well, for macro and micro generally, I mean, the reason why I talk mostly about macro and why I coach for macro mostly, I do
Mhm.
micro coaching, but macro coaching for the most part, at least when you get to a certain level in wars, like probably T2 and up, it's sort of at a point where yeah, micro is important and it's still good to coach micro and to min max that stuff, but like macro, like your decision making in general is going to supersede that. Uh, if you think about sort of where the game started in terms of like coordination and teamwork and like the caller for wars, individuals could have a major impact on on the outcome of wars. Uh, Purely because of, like, the damage that, uh the damage that people could do, right? So, over time, that has changed because people do less and less damage, right? Players uh, things have been nerfed slowly but surely over time to balance the game more and more to the point now where we're at, like, probably a point in the game where people have done the least damage really for the most part. Maybe there have been some other metas where people maybe done a little bit less damage, but for the most part, we're at a point now where the game is probably the most balanced it's ever been, to be honest, for especially for war meta. So that means that you can't have like there's no carries anymore. There's no like individual players who are just going to like can just like win you the war on their own. They can still have make good impact, but you you need everyone to kind of like pull their weight, right? You need your kill squad players to be uh, doing their job and translating their value to main ball. And likewise, you need all of your main ball groups to be pulling their weights. And then on top of that, the caller too. So like the caller probably has been the most impactful that it's ever been. And that is one of the reasons why not just people have to listen to the caller, but that the caller, like, needs to be coached too. Like, your caller should be getting coached, whoever the caller might be, they should be getting coached, so that they can improve. And it's they're integral, to kinda, like, the success of everything. And their, like, awareness, their game sense is, like, the that's also something that's, like, really important too, because that's something that's a little bit harder to teach. You can like make your game sense a little bit better from experience and from getting coached, but it's also kind of like just a natural thing that some people have or some people don't have. Uh,
Mhm.
with respect to the main ball, uh, because we're sort of at this point in the game where teamwork and coordination matters even more than it ever has because people don't do as much damage as they used to. It just means that not only just remember to be listening to the caller, but these quads like kind of have to work with each other. And when I say work with each other, I tend to mean like something like balling. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but balling tends to sort of just mean that you are, uh, your top quads and your bottom quads are working with each other and playing around each other, such that we're like kind of linking up to hit the same targets and kind of like pressure in the same sort of direction. And then setting up things for crashes. So yeah, the uh, everyone has to pull their own weight, and coordination is key. And coordination is going to be a mix of listening to the caller and calming with each other, uh, nonstop calming with each other, and kind of like focus firing with each other. Um, the kill squads are still important to main ball success. So even though it's just main ball people here right now, I'm just gonna talk about main ball. The kill squads, like that the kill squad stuff is still super important because it's going to translate to main ball pressure. It needs to translate to main ball pressure, right? Whatever kind of value we're getting on the outside with our kill squads, whatever winning that we're doing on the outside, that has to translate to main ball pressure. Otherwise, it's like we're just having two separate wars, right? We're having our main ball fight with the quads, and then we're having our coastal fights, and there's no connection between the two. There's no translation of value between these two, right? Whatever winning we're doing here isn't translating to the outside. Whatever winning we're doing on the outside isn't translating to the inside. So these things, the kill squad is integral to main ball success. And the only time it's not integral to main ball success, like when you're allowed to have separate wars, so to speak, is when one of these is like kind of is when like your main ball basically is like diffing the other main ball, right? So if your main ball is diffing the enemy main ball, well then your kill squads can just stalemate, right? We can just have our stalemate war and or even not stalemate. We can win our fights, but like never even worry about taking it to point because our main ball is like already winning. Doesn't matter. But for in practical terms and just in terms of like how people should like try to orient themselves and try to play, they need to you want to play to win and you want to play with principle, with good principle. So that the how your kill squads translate value to point is super 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 important, and also even helping to pull the weight of main, like help pull a little bit of weight there and make up maybe for like a main ball that isn't as strong as it could be, right? So maybe your main ball is a little bit weaker than your kill squad. Your kill squad can make up for that by playing properly. So I'll talk about right now just the dynamics between the quads and how this is like going to be super 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 basic, and this is just one of the ways that the quads can play with each other. There's lots of different ways that you can play, and you need to sort of be adaptive sometimes uh, to like what the enemy is doing. But for the most part, this will be like a baseline kind of thing that you can do, and that's pretty rudimentary, but it works, and it kind of gives you a good foundation for maybe to build off of and to think about. So I'll talk first about bottom quads, uh, and typically the bottom quads, the bottom quads, a lot of the time these quads are going to be the sort of like pseudo point groups in a way, or they try to be to some extent in terms of like the ones that have to maybe step a little bit more and like play to hold their ground a little bit more, whereas the top quads get to be a little bit more on and off, and sometimes even like let's say you're on strong side, for example, because in NA we're doing 15-5 for kill squads, right? So we have three kill squads on one side and one kill squad on the other. So it means we have a strong side essentially, right? If we're doing 10-10, there's not really a strong side. It's kind of even. Maybe in a 10-10, you could call your bond, like your wherever your respawns are coming from, your strong side in this case. But in a 10-10, it's a little bit more even. But we're doing 15-5 in NA. So like the strong side players in particular have to be a little bit more on and off. They have to be play like be willing uh to play a little bit more outside in, and our weak side quads want to be looking to be stepping more, right? If you're playing on weak side right now, there's any weak side players in here, you're gonna know that on weak side you tend to have not as much pressure because well there's just not as much action on the weak side, right? There's one less kill squad fight, and the kill squad fight that's happening is pretty far removed and pretty static and like away from everything. And then the only other stuff that's going on is kind of like the quad DPS fights. So you really just have to worry about the other quads, and that just means that weak side players you guys have to be stepping more. You guys have to be willing to be on point and be willing to like kind of like be sort of like a pseudo point team in that sense, where you're just constantly trying to step. Not that you're not going to do that on the strong side. It's just that with strong side comes more pressure, comes more opportunity. There's just more things that are happening. You're 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 going to have uh, more opportunity on strong side to be looking to help inner lane sometimes and to look to pressure outside an inner lane and just even stepping off because of the kind of amount of action that's going on, 'cause it's sort of forcing you to play a little bit more outside in sometimes. So that, like, in the basic, very, very basic sense, inner, or weak side and strong side, it's kind of like one side's a little bit more, um, outside in oriented, and then weak side, and one side's a little bit more inside out oriented. So weak side, lots of stepping, lots of trying to push players off, and bully people off, to just help generate tick, and yeah, and just willingness to be on point a little bit more. But back to kind of the dynamics between these two, bottom quads in general kind of gonna want to be holding your ground a little bit more. So, uh, so like a kind of a classic setup for bruisers, for bottom quad, you can have something kind of like, uh, bruiser, kind of like one bruiser, kind of holding this sort of like position here, uh, kind of like playing this. You're still trying to be stepping, but you're gonna be sort of like holding your ground here, and then you have your sort of second bruiser that's playing for more midline of space, and so you guys are kind of like coordinating pressure between each other like this. We're kind of like sandwiching, and the bottom bruiser, just the bruiser that's like holding their space on here, this bruiser is going to be under a lot of pressure because this is your enemy's top quad uh, position. So enemy is generally trying to push up, just like we're trying to push up. So there's lots of opportunity to to get pressured here and to feel under pressure here. But it means that this bruiser is going to be able to set up a lot of crashes. So bottom quad bruisers in general, you guys are definitely going to be very good for setting up crashes if you can hold your space and like keep enemy here and like kind of like hold sort of these angles. And then in conjunction with you guys doing this, uh, the quads, the top quad bruisers want to be kind of playing for the midline of space and like sandwich pressuring down to the position, on either side. And as long as this is happening, as long as this kind of dynamic is taking place, it's very, very, very easy to set up crashes in these bottom quad positions because you're going to have you're going to be able to bait a lot of enemies to kind of like be clumping on top of each other. And if you're living, if you the bruisers, the bottom quad bruisers are kind of like living through this, yeah, then you're gonna have opportunity to do like some really really nice crashes. The VGs, uh, um, kind of have to be very flexible with how they're moving around because as like a VG, you tend to get a lot of value playing outside in, no matter where you really are. But that's sort of value with respect to like your spell usage, right? That's not value with respect to like building tick because you're not stepping, right? So anytime any VGs in here, for example, anytime you guys are like stepping off point to get better angles, it's a good thing, but you just have to keep in mind that you're not stepping anymore. So there's a trade-off there, right? You get the better angle, you get to cut off your enemy or keep your enemy where you want to keep them, but at the same time, you're not stepping. So with that pressure, like let's say let's say you're like a top quad VG or something, or just whatever, you're just a VG, um, and you get a nice spell rotation on like a clump of players here, and it causes one of them to have to like jump off or something like that. Well, okay, great. One of them jumped off, and that is helpful for point, but you're also off point too, right? So it's kind of like a wash, right? You're not really generating tick, so because that person, you're just sort of you're equalizing the pressure. So you have to be willing to jump on more and like step as much as you possibly can, especially on weak side, especially on weak side and as top quad VGs. Top quad VGs in particular are going to be wanting stepping a lot, and just yeah, just keeping that in the back of your minds that you're looking for good angles and especially for crashes, you're trying to cut off exits, but you need to step too. You need to step off of that and not sacrifice that, for just good spell value all the time. Uh, but that's a really, really basic dynamic that that if you feel like if you guys feel like you're kind of at sort of a starting point in terms of like trying to understand Mainbow stuff, it's something I would go for. This sort of dynamic of having these bruisers in the bottom quads, especially on weak side. I would definitely say this for weak side. Having a bruiser that holds this, that like really holds this like bottom position as much as possible. And I would say that these bruisers should be your some of your better bruisers that do this, because they have to be kind of stepping a little bit, and they have to be like capable of dealing with a lot of pressure because they will be under a lot of pressure. But yeah, you kind of try the setup where you have these bruisers sort of holding this position. You have one that's sort of playing more for the midline of space, and they're sort of like connecting with each other in this manner. And then you have your top quads. Uh, Once they sort of like have some control, are pressuring down to sandwich, and to like kind of um, sort of like play for this sort of midline of space and then downwards. And then off of this, we're setting up crashes. This should be happening. You should just try to do this as like a baseline. Um,
Mhm.
as for the caller, I mean, there's not a lot I can say about the caller unless like, you want to look at a VOD or something or talk about um, maybe some of the things that like a caller should be thinking about. Generally better to like look at a caller VOD and talk about like they shouldn't be calling and what they should be thinking about. If you really kind of want to learn about what the caller should be doing. But in general, I mean, your quad's already gonna want to know that they're gonna be wanting to uh, constantly listen to the caller and your kill squads as well. So one thing that your kill squad should be doing, especially your quad DPS players in particular, is having the caller on and listening to the caller. Because I imagine you probably have a lot of kill squad players right now that just turn the caller off because they just don't think they need to be listening to calls, but they should be. Because for crash calls in particular, just imagine that you have some kind of crash call that's being made somewhere. Like, let's say we're going to crash top left or something from this perspective, and I have a fire staff player here and a fire staff player here, and I have maybe uh, some kill squad players right here, right? And they listen to this call, right? And they just kind of stop whatever they're doing for like one moment. If they're able to, listening for this, and they all just throw some spells at this crash, right? That this kind of thing, like your kill squads, your quad DPS getting used to doing this kind of stuff, like just throwing spells at some of the crashes, is insane value. It's like you can like single-handedly like win wars in this manner, because just the extra burst damage that you're getting from some of these players on the outside, just listening and uh, helping with the crashes, you convert like a couple extra kills, and then just off those kills that you get, you snowball point, right? So your quad DPS players, your kill squad players should be listening to the caller and should be listening for crash calls and then, yeah, trying to throw spells at those crash calls at a bare minimum. That's what, your sort of range player should be, looking to do. Uh, any questions? I can talk a little bit more about the specific quadrants. Um, uh, so generally speaking, the the way that kind of the way that pressure should be sort of building from like
Oh, I
in
saw.
terms of like the
I
main ball,
asked
it should kind of
what top
be
shot strong should look
a
when they
cascading
do
effect
help.
from the outside in. And that's because, well, that's just sort of more of a natural, easy progression. It's always gonna be harder for to get like value on the inside and then translate that on the outside, right? That's always gonna be a little bit more awkward. It's gonna be a little bit more difficult to translate value that way. And it will always be easier to translate value to the inside from outside in. So generally speaking, how you would want things to go ideally is that your G10 and like maybe your G10 and your G9, and then your G8 playing inner. You would have your 10 kind of win, and then off of that, they're sort of plussing pressure into nine's fight, and then off of nine, winning nine is plussing pressure into eight, and then eight is like able to just a become another, main ball, like, entity, and that's kind in an ideal world, like, this is how we would have things, uh, happen. Now from, like, top strong perspective, uh, there's gonna be lots of opportunity, like, because like you're going to be trying to you should want to be trying to play sort of from like a top down position, so like being on point and then pressuring down into bottom quad position. But you can do that here too, right? You can step out in inner lane and pressure down in the same manner, and so taking little opportunities to do that when you can is good. But you just have to remember that there's a trade-off to this, right? You're going to want to look for opportunity to do this, and there will be opportunity to do this. It's just that when you do that, right, you need to get good value, and you just don't want to you need to be careful about how long you commit for, right? So one thing that you'll see a lot of the times is like in a war is you'll have one of the sides, like one of the quads on strong side, they'll crash out into inner lane, right? I'm sure maybe you've seen this before, right? Or even you guys maybe done this before where you actually have a crash call that's in inner lane.
Oh yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so that can happen sometimes, right? But there's a trade-off there. So imagine you do this crash call out into inner lane, or the enemy does this crash call out into inner lane, and they don't get any kills off of this, right? There's two different things that can happen here. One is they can get caught in a counter crash a lot more easily, right? Because let's like the further that you do a crash call away from the point, well, what happens after the crash, right? You're typically those players are going to go straight back, right? Maybe some of them might wrap a little bit, but for the most part, players just come straight back, right? And so their movement is super, super predictable. And in this kind of moment, when like off of the crashes that's happening on the outside, when those players are then just coming back in, they can just be caught in a counter crash really, really easily because their movement can be tracked, and you kind of meet them as they're coming into the position, and then you call a crash there. So that's one thing that can happen, right? But another thing too is that these players that step off of point, well, they're stepping off of point if if the other quad, if like let's say enemies are crashing out here and you guys are still on point. Well, if you don't follow them, what happens? They're pressuring out in this position, um, but because of that, because they're stepping up point, you guys are generating tick time. So that's another trade-off too. That's something that the caller can look out for, right? And that's how you can sort of treat that kind of thing happening. So if like strong side players step off a point and they're pressuring down to inner, well, what you can do as a strategy is to just stay on point and tick, and the caller maybe will call something out to the inner lane and just tell them to play life. So these inner lane players, like your G8, for example, they just play life and they just try and survive and waste time, waste the time of those quad players, and maybe they'll get pushed back a little bit. That's fine. But in the process of doing that, we just have players on point still that maybe are even bullying across, but still just like having presence on point so that you're like ticking. Um, but yeah, in terms of like top strong, you're gonna want to be just kind of playing similarly to top weak. It's just that because of this inner lane fight, there's gonna be opportunity to step out and to pressure out here. And you should go for that. You should be looking for that. You should be looking for chances to do that. You just have to understand what you're giving up, right? You're stepping on points. Now you're not ticking. So you need to be getting good value. And then, well, how long am I going to be here trying to get value? How much time am I committing to being to stepping off point and to not thinking about point pressure in general?
Now, I always treated it, would you agree with this, kind of like a crash. You go in there, you spend your abilities, and you try to take back the space on point
You mean
when you're helping enter.
yeah? So you're stepping off. You're trying to help make a little bit of space, and then you're going back, straight back, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah,
Or is
yeah.
that what you
Like
meant?
I'm saying, like don't overplay your hand in there. Don't stay too long. Like you can help win the fight, but you can't hold the space, kind of thing.
Yeah,
He's rejecting
yeah,
the truth.
exactly. I mean,
He's
that's
rejecting
the kind
God's
of thing you
grace and
have
God's love.
to. Yeah,
Oh, fuck, what's
yeah,
that?
sure. I mean, you have to play everything situationally, but that should be kind of the idea in your head is like, how long am I committing to this? Have I done enough work? Like, have I got enough value? Should I even be stepping off right now? Right? Like, let's say for example, we get a bunch of wipes on the on strong side, right? A lot of players' instincts in that moment will be like, oh, okay, like we got like a bunch of wipes here. Oh, I can step off now and help these guys, right? But well, the whole benefit of having gotten kills on the side and having gotten control on the side is like now we can generate tick on point, which is everything, right? We constantly want to be trying to generate tick, to pull everything in and to like force the issue constantly. So yeah, that might be an instinct for someone to step off, like, and now you can flex off, like you've killed somebody, but you're also like detracting now from getting ticks. So if you're gonna step off and do something, like you have to get crazy value, and you can't be off for too long. Uh, so just things like that, knowing when it's okay for you to step off and when it's a good idea potentially to play for outside value. Um,
Now,
and
since
then
we're
also,
on the
yeah,
topic too, can you talk about the lower strong? A lot the same, right?
yeah, definitely similar. I would say again, like in terms of the setup that I was talking about before, of having a kind of anchor for these positions, for the bot positions are good. It's going to be a little bit more difficult on strong side. You still want to try to go for it. And it will be more difficult on strong side because of the inner lane fight that's happening on this side as well. On weak side, it will be much easier. You'll still feel a lot of pressure trying to do it. But on weak side, it should be easier. But you should try to do it on strong side. It's just that like the only way it's gonna work is if your top quads uh, are are playing for the midline space. Like they're pressuring down into this bot quad position and not just kind of like hovering around up here. That's one thing that like if there's any top quad players here, you guys you cannot just hover around up here and just like try and stay up here. You have to pressure down from the position, to link up and to meet with the bottom quad so that you're like sandwiching, and that you're like helping to make space so that they can like have breathing room here, and so that's like you're pushing the enemy into this position and like helping like to set up crash, but like helping to increase crash potential for the main ball. But for bot strong players, yeah, you're trying to be that anchor here, but you do still also have to think about off-plane opportunity, sometimes, and Also, just because there's more stuff going on over here, you can
Race up
think
from their
to play a little bit more
thrones, all the
outside
kings
in
of
during crashes to kind of like get good angles, um, and to like cover
Sorry about that.
exits a little bit better. You're free to do this a lot more than you can on weak side. Uh,
Hey Naomi.
anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, so let's say we have our enemy team shoving into Oppo, right? And just taking a lot of presence off of point. Um, you know, therefore making a lot of space on point for our players to step. Like who should be stepping and like how often and like how aggressive should they be like getting? I guess I'm more curious about like the healers. Is this like a good opportunity for them to tiptoe on and off point, generate some tick here?
Yeah, I think your healers in general should constantly be trying to step as much as possible. They should be trying to rat step as as I call it, like as much as possible. Now, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how that's gonna look, you want to distribute that out kind of in a way that makes sense. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, your top strong healer, they should not be thinking about
Into Abraham's
stepping
bosom.
in the same manner as like a point healer or something, or even a bot healer, right? Because they have uh, because their player is going to be more in the top position, and because of that, they have to and just because of the nature of like the quad that they're healing, there's potential for them to heal outside stuff. They need to be willing to do that, right? To take space, to push up, to try and play a little bit at a higher position, and think about healing into Oppo, for example, and healing like the quad DPS players and any kill squad players potentially, more than just stepping, right? So you're gonna have some healers that hard prio stepping as much as possible, and then other healers are gonna be thinking about healing the outside more, right? So
Mm-hmm.
uh, on weak side, for example, like your quad DPS players are they're gonna be needing to get heals, and uh, the healers on this side, like whoever, which for whatever groups that they're in, like those healers, like look, uh, if we're trying to control this top right space as like quad DPS players, um, like we need to be able to play a little bit higher up, and if we're pressuring enemy into their road and like holding them back, like we're gonna like these healers, their healers can't just sit back here, right? They have to push up a little bit too, and yes, they can look for opportunity to step, but they don't have to. They shouldn't have to think about that as much, right? So again, it's kind of a balance of like the more centralized your position is as a healer, the more you're going to think about stepping, and the more sort of um, away from main ball or like outside oriented you are as a healer, like the more you need to think about like off healing the outside and your position in particular. Like the positioning of the healer is it's so vital. It's so important that healers use space fluidly on the outside as it's earned, right? So like as you're winning space somewhere, like let's say your quad DPS have like really good control of like this top right space or something like on attack, and like they're able to hold enemy back and play up here, it's so important that all the space behind them is like being used by the healers, right? It makes it so that like when these healers get engaged on, like when anyone wants to pressure these healers, they're all our healers are nicely spread out, and it means too that when they get engaged, they're getting engaged closer to the enemy's half of the field, right? It's always better just from like a general macro perspective, like you can just keep this in the back of your head as like a fundamental thing that it is always going to be better to fight on the enemy's half of the field, right? So yeah, some healers that think about stepping, some healers that think about positioning and off healing the outside.
Okay. What does that look like in fort for both like an attack and a defense?
So
For
in
like healer positioning and
for
stepping.
fort, it's gonna be a little bit more trickier because in fort everything kind of balances out. There's no more strong side or weak side in fort, and
Hmm.
typically because everything's so like localized towards the point, it's really for healers going to be about not stepping and living and healing. Off healing in particular is good, but just living and just like constantly being able to pump is all healers really have to think about. And in that sense, in the fort, healers are just looking to cryo, lots of off healing, and keeping themselves alive, which means pre-moving, and and looking looking for good position, constantly, so that you can mitigate any kind of like pressure that you could be taking. Healers can step in forts, and if you're in a position as a healer and you notice that like where you're playing is close enough to the point, and there's often lots of open space opening up on off the point for whatever reason. Yeah, I mean, as a healer, like, look, at the end of the day, everyone should play limits, and yeah. So if your positioning is already close to the point and you see opportunity, go for it. Go for that. Go. Go for it and help generate a little bit of extra tech. Did that answer your question, or
No, yeah, it did. Thank you.
okay?
I know this
Other
is
questions?
yeah. Before I go, does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Okay.
I got one. So just now you were saying that for top side, it's better to control the space. And I guess this is more of like situal awareness. But if you're controlling the space up top, wouldn't it be better for going back to your point probably like 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, how you're pulling your kill squads in? Wouldn't it be beneficial to pull them in to get them to step on point and then push them back out, but you might lose the space. So would you rather control the space or would you rather step on point, or is that situational?
I think typically, like, are you saying so in a situation where like you've maybe won this space or something, or you've gotten some picks on point or something? You're saying, would it be better to maybe quickly go outside, get some value to help pull those people in to get even more pressure?
Right, like you were saying, like you control the top half, right? And you're
Yes.
pushing them back, right? Would you rather control the space or would you rather pull your kill squads in and generate more tick? Like, or is
Uh,
that more situational?
so if I understand what you're saying, um, look, if you have control in these top quad positions, the way
Right.
that you should then be thinking about like next step pressure is by pressuring down. And that's kind of what I mean by like these top quads. Like you can't just float around up here, and you can't just float around up here, and you can't just float on and off like this, even if you're pressuring out here. You have to use the control that you have up here, the space that you have up here, to pressure down into the position. And if you don't do this, what is going to happen is that you're going to have your bottom quads that are trying to hold space down there, and they will be unable to hold space down there. And what they will end up doing is they'll just come up here with you. And so what will happen is you'll have a bunch of people up here, and then your enemy down here, right? And it will be much harder to generate tick this way because we're kind of just like swapping sides, you know? So really what has to happen is off of the control up here, that has to translate down into this. And your kill squads, and that's fine because that's going to generate tick. Like y- you pulling your kill squads in is it's fine in theory to be doing that, but really they're going to get pulled in anyways if you're generating tick, because what's going to happen is the enemy kill squad is going to have to start looking in, right? The more that the point picks up, everybody's inwards attention. I mean, this should be the case. It should be the case that your inwards attention to the point is proportional to the tick. such that the more the point ticks up, the more everyone thinks about looking in and focusing and pressuring inwards. So you're gonna pull everything in by generating tick. That's how you kind of have to think about it. So I'd be very wary about stepping off to like help pull kill squad players in like off of having control here. I would be much more inclined to just stay on point, maybe even pressure across the other side to bully even more players off, or again pressuring down, like making sure that that like the control that I've gotten up here, um, like it means like I can take that and extend it down into this position. If there's players down here, right? Because maybe that's the case that well, generally is going to be the case that like if you like off the control you have up here, like your enemy has to go somewhere, right? And typically they're going to be trying to push up just like you're trying to push up, and yeah, they'll be trying to hide and play down in their in your bottom, which is their top.
Hey, I got one more question for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like say like your kill squads unfortunately lose or whatnot, and you're on left side quads and their spears are even like touching point and looking in. Should you try to confront them there, push out on inner, or should you just give up that left side of the quad point?
So if you're if you've lost on the outside and now there's some kill squad players or quad DPS players that are actually pressuring main ball and you're feeling that pressure, right?
Correct.
You're like a quad player and you're feeling that pressure from them and you're kind of like wondering what you should do. I mean, look, sad day, you know? Kind of sucks if that happens. If you lose on the outside and now you have this extra pressure, there's not a lot you can do. You sometimes you might have to step off to live. You could try to hold position and maybe just play edges to kind of live and just hold them there until people come back. There's not a lot you can do. Like, look, if you're losing on the outside and now you have kill squad players that are pressuring in, you're just plussed, right? As long as like the sides are generally like pretty evenly matched, like you're gonna not be able to hold the space. You're not gonna be able to hold that space. Now, what you could do to maybe circumvent that or to try and like deal with it is maybe calling crashes on this side, right? So like those players have come in now, like you have some extra, you're getting plus 1 point, and so to like get those players off the position to bully them away, we like call for a crash on the side. But just know that like things are not looking good already. Like if you've lost inner lane and you're receiving like you're getting plus by kill squad players, like things are already kind of doomed. Yeah. So I would focus on living for the most part, and as a caller, I would think about how I can punish those players because you know, yes, you are getting plus, but that also just means there's more like the enemies are going to be a little bit more clumped together, a little bit more localized in one space, and maybe they can be punished for it. So you can potentially maybe punish them as the caller and try and like get a good crash. But just know that it's just things are already going to be hard because even off of a crash, like you could even try and call a crash, for example. But even off of that, like maybe the players over here from the other side, like can't like even if they can get to the crash, like if all the players over here are like just dancing around everywhere because they're just trying to live, like maybe they're not going to be able to be like, maybe their timing is going to be off, or they've used their spell, like many of their spells in order to just live. So the crash ends up not being that good, right? So just keep that in mind that once this kind of thing is happening, it's kind of like there's not a lot you can do.
You wouldn't recommend like just moving it more central, like top center, and then towards the flag if you're on bottom. Just kind of
Moving what?
your
Moving
quad,
the
like moving the fight to the right instead of
uh
left.
so you could try to play it like that where you basically if you're going to do that, if you're going to try and leave this side that like let's say you're losing strong side really really hard, if you're going to leave it, it has to be a concerted effort from the army to reorient themselves in terms of the field, right? Because if we look at the field in this orientation, like let's say we're attacking, this is top right, this is top left. But if you give up this side and you start trying to play from the other side, well, basically what you're doing is that if you don't control this side enough, um, you're kind of just giving up too much of the field. So the orientation is going to have to change. So really, what's going to happen is this is going to strong side is going to become your top side. Strong side should become your top side, and one of your kill squads, like your group 8, for example, you should send them over here. So you basically turn everything into a 10-10. And then you play in this manner. You play like this, right? So this is top. Now this is top right, and like this is the top side, and you play. Yeah, you play to like hard control this side, and you just kind of move things around again and try it and try and restart. And you go for a 10-10 split instead to sort of have that to sort of like maintain this kind of control. If you're gonna give up a side and try to like play from and try to play over from the right side, you have to reorient the field. So the caller will have to call that out, and the entire army will have to change how they're playing. If you want to do that. But I mean, yeah, again, like that's rough, and it's gonna be hard to pull that off mid, like everything happening. So generally speaking, in that moment, it's like, well, you probably just call a reset, right? And I think that's something that you guys should consider a lot is when, if you have a bad start, if you have a bad initial push, especially as the caller and like the caller like recognizing this, just call a reset really, really fast. Like, in EU, like they're very, very like good at just calling resets extremely fast, right? And just like getting lots and lots and lots of attempts in rather than trying to like force the issue. Uh,
Hmm.
that's also something I would consider as well. Any other questions? I could talk about pushing, talk about some kill squad stuff maybe, but if that's mostly it.
Um.
I can go into more
Yeah.
detail on certain things if you guys want, because this is very baseline, kind of in terms of the stuff I was talking about for the main ball, very baseline stuff, just to kind of like give you a good starting point.
Anyone got anything?
I'd just say, like, listen to your caller, really. Like, if they're saying ball up, everybody should be balling up. You really got to pay attention to the caller these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the caller has a major impact on things. I think the caller it's tricky because like the caller has to have really good game sense and they have to really understand what their army is capable of doing and not capable of doing. Because sometimes maybe you are going to call to be for people to be balling up, but maybe they just can't ball up because for whatever reason they're not able to because of some kind of pressure or something that's happening. I think one of the biggest things that the caller has to be good at is having really good awareness of what is happening on the outside. I think a caller that has really good outside awareness too, like coupled with good inside awareness, is like a very, very, very good caller because they'll be able to like micro the inside better and they'll be able to micro the outside better, which is really important um, for just like building pressure generally, just for like having good consistent pressure. And in fort, for example, like it's even more like impactful because like pulling things in, you can really like generate pressure a lot faster. But yeah, everyone should be listening to the caller. That's a baseline thing. But on top of that, the caller themselves should be getting coached. Caller has to be getting coached just like any other player. They have to be improving each war and working on things and yeah, getting a little bit better bit by bit, just like anybody else.
Do you have time to talk about pushing advantage?
Yes, I can talk about pushing advantage. Anything in particular? Just like general idea of pushing advantage?
Yeah, like what you do with the space, what that you have, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you're going to do with that when you accomplish that.
Yeah,
When
I
you
mean
have
push. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was done.
Okay. I mean, in a really general sense, I've already kind of brought it up here a couple of times. It's kind of just like
Hmm.
what do you do when you get value, right? Like how do you convert that elsewhere? And with Kill Squad players in particular, it's a constant struggle to it's a constant battle to not role play as a Kill Squad player. And what I mean by that is, you know, you're like, let's say you're in a 5v5, like, I don't know, let's say we're a weak side and we're having our 5v5 fight up here, and like we kill, you know, like we kill two people or something. Like we're attacking and we kill two people. Like, what do we do off of that, right? So like, how do we push advantage? How do we take the value that we got and convert it elsewhere? And the main way that this needs to be thought about is with respect to end goals, right? So like, what is my ultimate goal, right? I'm in G10, for example, and at the start of like the first push, as we're like coming into the last point, like I'm like, over here, or I'm, out in Narnia or something, like having my fight. Like, what is my end goal position? Like, where would I ideally want to be, and like what would I ideally want to be doing, if I could be doing it, right? So like as a G10, for example, ideally, like the place where you would want to be playing, like in an ideal world, like in a perfect world, you would probably be like top rightist position, maybe near ramparts, and you would be free firing into points and into the
Hmm.
road, right? That's what you would. That's like your end. So this is your end goal. That's the end goal of G10. So from the beginning of your push as G10, like start of a push, like everything that you're doing, uh, is for the sake of this, is to lead to this, to get to this point eventually. So off of any advantage that you get on along the way, the next thing that you do should always be, again, for the ultimate sake of like somehow getting in this position to be able to be doing this. You're constantly working for this. Um, and that can mean, like as a G10, for example, like you get a pick or something in your fight and now someone can flex off. Well, that's pushing advantage, right? The flexing off of that push is pushing advantage. And in this case, depending on where you are, it's going to mean flexing. It's going to mean snowballing, or pushing advantage on G9's fight, right? Such that you allow them to get more space, so like win their fight or get a pick, such that one of them can flex off into G8's fight, and then G8's fight gets snowballed, etc. Until, again, the end goal we were helping to reach this end goal of main ball pressure. And you can probably think of main ball pressure and main ball tick as like the ultimate goal for pretty much everybody. Pretty much the main goal for everybody, even G10. G10 maybe is a little bit more has a little bit more freedom to just be thinking more about outside space, but for the most part, they're still trying to do everything to cascade pressure inwards. So snowballing other people's fights, to make that happen. But for the most part, in general, everyone's like trying to get into the stage where they can like just directly like hit main ball players. It's just too OP. Like it's too OP uh, to have extra pressure on the main ball. It forces everything else inwards and just uh like kind of like speeds up the timeline of like everything else that's happening. And makes the enemy make more mistakes too. So pushing advantage in a sense is that's kind of what it's all grounded in. It's grounded in, I've done like the first step, and the next thing I need to do needs to get me closer to the last step.
Hmm. Okay.
and that looks different for different groups, right? So for example, if you're in G7 and you get some advantage here, well, you're not really just going to go directly to point, right? What you might do is, well, you have this, I think, I don't know, do you guys have this setup right now where you have your quad DPS on weak side fighting each other in like a 3v3? Are you guys doing that, or do you have some other kind of setup?
It's right now they're in a 3-man comm.
Yep.
I would say they probably help G7 win their fight.
So that's good that they do that. I think if we're talking about attack or even defense, I think that's initially how they play, right? So let's say that we're
Mhm.
pushing into the position for the first time. Uh, you should want to have your quad DPS players, the three of them, helping G7 to like take space and like win space and like push the enemy back, right? And like sort of like win their initial fight, win that space, and then they should be like looking to like default in, right? So they shouldn't be
Yeah.
playing with those guys like permanently. They should be looking to help them get some time of advantage. And then because again, like I said before, like this three, the three that are here, like what do they want to do? Like what would want to be doing in an ideal world as quad DPS players here? Well, I would just want to be just hitting mainball people for free. Just permanently just hitting mainball players for free and just like farming them here. That's what I would want to be doing, right? So if
Mhm.
I want to be doing that off of the winning that off of like winning and holding this top right space, like I don't want to be going over here to do this fight with G7. Like I,
Yeah.
and if I do want to do it, like I want to be doing it very lightly. Only like with the idea that like maybe I help make a little bit of space for them again, like I would be initially on like a first push, to like help that to like bring them in a little bit too, or just to help them hold the space a little bit better. But again, it's also that like I can do this more, like I can do this, I can pressure point more effectively. So really,
Mhm.
it's going to be in the case of like G7 pushing advantage should really be the case that these G7 players here, in particular, maybe the Fire Staff player, um, but just the players in general, off of any kind of positional advantage or any sort of advantage, they're looking to flip these guys the fight here, right? So they're turning here, and it's much easier. Again, like it's always going to be easier to get to get some value on the outside and bring it in more much more easier than to get value here and then bring it out to bring it back in, right? Because it's all for main ball value at the end of the day. So it's extra steps to go out. So it has to be worth it to do that. And generally speaking, it's just usually not going to be. Uh, but yeah, so that would be G7s, right? G7 off of their advantage, they're looking to flip the 3v3 that's happening here such that it causes those quad players to have to fall back more and to lose the space so that now the quad players here can focus main ball players. And then
Okay.
maybe off of that, maybe then once those guys are doing that and then G7 has an opportunity still, like they're still holding space, and then maybe they can join them too at some point, or they can try to get some main ball value as well. But generally speaking, that's how they shouldn't really have to. They should just be holding the space and allowing the quad DPS players here to do that, right? To
Mhm.
to, to get this like extra main ball pressure.
In that
That
in that I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that's good. You're fine.
In that weak side 3v3, right? They should still win that 3v3 and then look in, right? Or are they just
Well, yeah, of course, because
yeah, okay.
what's going to happen if they just try to if those three just try to just start focusing people? Well, I mean, their three are just going to just bully them back, right? They
Yeah.
have to contest them. They have to win this space for the most part, like kind of like win this sort of top right space. But then, yeah, off of that, like once we've pushed them back a little bit and they're sort of like, more towards their road and we're kind of controlling the space better, yeah, we should be looking at every opportunity that we can to get a little bit of a main ball pressure in, right? We again because everything that we do on the outside, it must translate to inside pressure.
Got it.
And the only time that it can't that you're allowed to not translate value from outside to inside is when your inside is winning on its own, right? Then we can just stalemate on the outside all we want, We never have to carry anything in because our inside is just winning by itself, so we can just have 2 separate wars. But that's, again, right, you wanna play with principle, and you don't want to just say, "I'm just gonna rely on my main ball to win the war, and I'm just gonna, like, stalemate on the outside." That can be a strategy, if your main ball really is that good and you have a really good understanding of the enemy and, like, their limitations, you can try for that. You can have everyone play with that understanding, but still, you wanna, um, again, constantly be pulling pressure in towards point.
Got it. Anyone got anything else? All right. Well, we have a war coming up at 8 p.m. and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming out and helping us and answering our questions. We really
Sure.
appreciate it.
Sure. If anyone
Yeah,
has
okay.
any other questions or whatever, you can always message me. Fine to help if I can.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you,
luck.
Naomi.
Good luck with your guys' war, and yeah, see you.
Gotcha.
Cool. There you have it. guys.
Rothers posted.